Picture this. Beneath the crystal chandeliers of Christie's auction house, two legends facing off over one of rock history's most iconic guitars. But nobody knows that tonight won't just be an auction. This will be the night when arrogance learns its greatest lesson, and the true meaning of music gets reminded. It was a cold New York evening in November 2018. Christie's Rockefeller Center auction salon had been prepared to host the music industry's most distinguished names. From Elvis's first guitar to Prince's Purple Rain costume, pieces of rock history lined the walls. But the star of that evening was a red Gibson ES 335, gleaming inside a glass case. The legendary guitar Chuck Berry had been using since 1958, the one he wrote Johnny Be Good with, the instrument woven into the very DNA of rock and roll. The starting price had been set at $2 million, and everyone in the room knew that number was going much, much higher. In the front rows sat Roger Waters, the 75-year-old Pink Floyd legend. In his immaculate Italian-cut Prada suit, looked as if he were attending a royal reception. He was whispering to his music historian and advisor, Philip Thornton, seated beside him. "Philip, this guitar will be the crown jewel of my collection. I've already determined where it will be displayed in my museum room at Highgate." Roger's voice was filled with that familiar, condescending tone. Philip nodded, but couldn't say anything, because Roger was already continuing. "Nobody here tonight possesses the musical sophistication to understand this guitar's true value. Most are just wealthy collectors, not people who actually understand music." In the back of the room, however, was an entirely different scene. Ozzy Osbourne sat comfortably in his worn black jeans, a black t-shirt from his youth, and a leather jacket bearing the marks of years. The 70-year-old rock legend looked like he was from another planet among the tuxedoed, glittering crowd around him. Sharon wasn't beside him, only his longtime assistant, young Jimmy Chen. "Jimmy, this is Chuck Berry's guitar, right?" Ozzy asked, looking at the instrument in the display case. His voice was soft but curious with that familiar Birmingham accent. Jimmy confirmed. "Yes, Mr. Osbourne, this is the Johnny Be Good guitar, one of the most important instruments in music history." Ozzy nodded, deep respect in his eyes. "Without Chuck Berry, none of us would have made it here. We owe him even Tony's riffs. The Beatles, Stones, Floyd, all of us." The auctioneer, an elegant woman named Victoria Ashford, stepped onto the stage and approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this evening's most special lot. Before you stands Chuck Berry's 1958 Gibson ES 335. This guitar is part of rock and roll's birth certificate." Applause rose from the room, but Roger Waters didn't clap at all, just turned to Philip. "An exaggerated introduction. It's just a guitar. Of course it has historical value, but it can't compare to the musical complexity and artistic depth of the Fender Stratocaster I used on the wall." Philip shifted uncomfortably, growing tired of Roger's presumptuous commentary. In the back row, Ozzy was listening quietly, but he'd heard Roger's voice. That condescending tone, it felt familiar. Victoria began the auction. "We're starting at $2 million, gentlemen." Roger immediately raised his paddle without hesitation. $2,100,000. Victoria smiled. $2,100,000 from Mr. Waters. Any other bids? A few seconds of silence. Then Ozzy's calm voice rose from the back rows. $2,200,000. Roger turned and looked toward the back rows. Who's this? How did he get in here dressed like that? But then he saw Ozzy's face and turned back around with slight surprise. $2,500,000, Roger said, his voice now carrying some edge. Philip whispered beside him, "Roger, perhaps we shouldn't go this far." But Roger silenced him. "Philip, please. This guitar must be mine. I'm a pioneer of progressive rock. Ozzy Osbourne is just someone who makes heavy metal noise." Ozzy raised his bid. $2,700,000. His voice was still calm, as if he were bargaining for a cup of tea. Jimmy whispered beside him, "Mr. Osbourne, this is escalating very quickly." Ozzy smiled with that familiar, mischievous grin. "Jimmy, Chuck Berry was my hero. In the 1960s in Birmingham, when I first heard Roll Over Beethoven on my father's old radio, my life changed. That guitar isn't just a guitar. It's my youth, my dreams, everything." Jimmy nodded. He could see that deep emotional connection in Ozzy's eyes. Roger raised his bid to $3 million. His voice was now harder, more determined. $3 million. And I hope this nonsense ends here. Philip was shocked. Roger, this is way above the starting price. Roger ignored him, his eyes locked on Ozzy in the back rows. Victoria Ashford maintained her professionalism and continued. $3 million from Mr. Waters. Any other bids? Ozzy, without any rush, as if time itself was under his control, raised his hand. $3,200,000. The room had gone completely silent now. Other potential buyers had decided to watch this battle between two legends. Roger's face was beginning to flush. Philip could see he was starting to get angry. $3.5 million, Roger shouted, his patience finally exhausted. Everyone in the room turned to look at him. Victoria said with astonishment, Mr. Waters, $3,500,000. This is an extraordinary figure. But Ozzy, with the same composure, $3,750,000. Jimmy's eyes had gone wide as saucers. Mr. Osbourne, this is a very high amount. Ozzy laughed with that familiar gentle chuckle. Jimmy, I've been making money for 50 years and never spent it properly. Sharon always says, Ozzy, spend that money on something. I suppose I should listen to her today. A slight laugh was heard from the room. Ozzy's sincere manner had softened the atmosphere a bit. Roger was now standing. Philip was trying to grab his arm, but Roger shook him off. $4 million, he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. Victoria Ashford was trying to maintain her professionalism, but this situation was far from normal. Mr. Waters is offering $4 million. Mr. Osbourne? Everyone turned to Ozzy. The old rocker calmly stood up, began walking slowly toward the front, his hair disheveled, his clothes ordinary, but his presence was changing the energy of the room. As he passed by Roger, he stopped and turned to him. Roger, mate, he said in that soft Birmingham accent. What does this guitar mean to you? Really tell me. Roger looked at Ozzy with bewilderment. This question had caught him unprepared. This is a historic instrument. It represents musical sophistication, the evolution of rock music. His sentences were cliched, hollow. Ozzy nodded. Yes, but what does it mean to you? What does it make you feel in your heart? Roger couldn't answer. Philip beside him had lowered his head in shame. Ozzy continued, his voice now more emotional. Let me tell you what Chuck Berry means to me. In 1963 in Birmingham, I was 15 years old. My father worked in a steel factory. My mother cleaned rich people's houses. We had nothing, but our neighbor Mr. Henderson had a radio, and one day it played Johnny Be Good. Roger, when I heard that guitar riff, I knew my life was going to change. That music gave me hope, taught me to dream. The room was completely silent, everyone listening to Ozzy's words. Chuck Berry's guitar, Ozzy continued, his eyes locked on the instrument in the display case, isn't just a collector's piece. It's the beginning of millions of children's dreams. If Tony Iommi hadn't heard that guitar, Black Sabbath would never have existed. Keith Richards, John Lennon, all of us owe Chuck. This guitar shouldn't sit in a museum, Roger. This guitar should tell its story, inspire, live. Ozzy turned back to Victoria. $4,500,000. Roger's mouth hung open. He couldn't respond anymore, defeated both financially and emotionally. Victoria asked for the third time. Any other bids? Silence. $4,500,000 going once, twice, 3 times. Sold! To Mr. Osbourne! Tremendous applause erupted in the room. People had risen to their feet, but Ozzy wasn't even hearing the applause. His eyes were still locked on that guitar. Jimmy came to his side. Congratulations, Mr. Osbourne! Ozzy laughed. Sharon's going to kill me when she finds out. She'll ask, Ozzy, why did you buy a $4.5 million guitar? And I'll say, because it was Chuck Berry, love. During the post-auction cocktail hour, the room was packed. Roger Waters sat quietly in a corner, Philip beside him. It was a terrible evening, Roger said, gripping his whiskey glass tightly. I feel like a fool. Philip gently. Roger, perhaps this should be a lesson. Music isn't just about being sophisticated. It's also about emotion and connection. Roger didn't respond. At that moment, Ozzy was heading to the area where the guitar was being collected, with Jimmy. The staff had placed the guitar in a special case. Ozzy stood before the display and took a deep breath looking at the guitar. "Jimmy, can I hold this guitar?" Jimmy was surprised. "Of course, Mr. Osbourne, it's yours now." Ozzy very gently, as if holding a baby, took Chuck Berry's Gibson ES 335 in his hands. His fingers touched the strings, felt the wear of years. "We need to organize something tomorrow," he said. Jimmy asked curiously, "Like what, Mr. Osbourne?" Ozzy smiled. "A coffee. With Roger Waters." The next morning, Ozzy's assistant contacted Roger's manager. So at 3 in the afternoon, they met at a small cafe in Manhattan's Soho district. When Ozzy arrived, he was in those same comfortable clothes, while Roger was again in his impeccable suit. "Roger, mate, sit down," Ozzy said, smiling. Roger sat somewhat tensely. "Ozzy, I need to apologize for last night. I was too competitive." Ozzy waved his hand. "Come on, you just wanted that guitar. So did I. The difference is, I wanted it for a different reason." When the waiter brought their coffees, Ozzy continued, "Roger, you're an incredible musician. The Dark Side of the Moon, The Wall. These are masterpieces. You've made some of the best progressive rock ever. But last night, when you looked at that guitar, what did you think? Did you see a collector's piece, or Chuck Berry's fingerprints?" Roger silently sipped his coffee. Ozzy's question had unsettled him because he knew the answer. I had only seen a historic piece. Like you said, maybe I'd forgotten the emotional connection." Ozzy nodded. "Look, I've made plenty of mistakes too. I bit the bat's head off, nearly killed Sharon with drinking, struggled with drugs for years, but I never lost one thing: the true meaning of music. Music isn't for ego, it's for people. When you wrote The Wall, that album told your pain. People connected because you were real. But last night, when you were trying to get that guitar, ego was talking, not heart." Roger looked away from Ozzy. "You're right. In recent years, I've lost myself too much. Chasing musical perfection, I forgot why music matters." Ozzy laughed gently. "We've gotten old, Roger. But getting old doesn't have to make us arrogant. Look, I want to show you something." Ozzy pulled out his phone and opened a video. The video showed a moment from 2015 from one of Ozzy's charity concerts. Ozzy was on stage singing Paranoid, but there was something in the middle, a 12-year-old child sitting in a wheelchair. "This is Danny," Ozzy said. "He had muscular disease, couldn't speak. But that night, he tried to sing my song. Roger, you need to see that moment. The light in that child's eyes, that's what music is. Not ego, connection." Roger's eyes filled as he watched the video. "This is incredible," he whispered. Ozzy closed his phone. "That's why Chuck Berry's guitar mattered. Not just for me, but for millions of kids like Danny. Because that guitar is a symbol of what allows them to dream." Roger raised his head. "Ozzy, what are you going to do with this guitar?" Ozzy smiled with that mischievous grin. "First, I'll try to convince Sharon why I spent $4.5 million. Then I'm going to donate this guitar to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It'll be displayed there with Chuck's story. That way kids like Danny can see it, be inspired." Roger was shocked. You're going to donate it? A $4.5 million guitar?" Ozzy shrugged. "Roger, mate, I'm 70 years old. What am I going to do with the money now? I've got Sharon, I've got my kids, I've got my dogs. If this guitar stays with me, it's just going to be shelf decoration. But if it's at the Hall of Fame, it'll inspire millions of people. Chuck Berry's legacy should live like that." Roger understood something in that moment. Ozzy Osbourne, the man the media called crazy, was actually one of those who understood music's true meaning best. "Ozzy," Roger said, his voice trembling, "I've learned so much from you. I'm sorry for the disrespect I showed both you and music." But then Ozzy said something unexpected. "Roger, actually, I have a proposal for you." Roger looked on with curiosity. "I'm going to donate that guitar to the Hall of Fame, but you should give a concert there. Play Chuck Berry songs, keep his legacy alive. Progressive rock master Roger Waters returns to rock and roll's roots. That would be a great story." Roger's eyes lit up. You would do that? I mean, I was so terrible to you last night. Ozzy laughed. Roger, music teaches forgiveness. Chuck Berry would have known that. Now it's time for us to learn. Roger, for the first time in his life, looked at Ozzy Osbourne with genuine respect. I accept. And Ozzy, thank you, not just for the guitar, but for what you've taught me. 3 months later, a special evening was held at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Chuck Berry's Gibson ES-335 was displayed in a magnificent showcase. Ozzy and Sharon were sitting in the front row, Sharon still making jokes about her husband's $4.5 million impulse decision. Ozzy, next time call me before you do something this big, she said, laughing. Then Roger Waters took the stage, a Fender Telecaster in his hands. Good evening, he said into the microphone. Tonight, I'm here thanks to a man who convinced me to be here, Ozzy Osbourne. Applause rose. Ozzy reminded me of music's true meaning, not for ego, but for people. And tonight we're going to pay tribute to Chuck Berry. When Roger started playing Johnny Be Good, the room rose to its feet. Ozzy was standing too, holding Sharon's hand, his eyes locked on the stage. He could see that guitar standing in the display case, gleaming under the lights. When Roger finished the song, he invited Ozzy to the stage. Ozzy, please come up here. Ozzy was surprised, but stepped onto the stage. Roger hugged him, in front of the crowd. This man, Roger said, taught me the most valuable lesson. Music isn't a race, it's a journey. And in that journey, love wins, not ego. Ozzy took the microphone, speaking in that familiar Birmingham accent. We all owe Chuck Berry. Without him, I wouldn't exist. Roger wouldn't exist. None of us would. Tonight, we're not just celebrating a guitar, we're celebrating a legacy. And I hope this legacy's story inspires kids like Danny out there. The room was applauding on its feet, many people's eyes filled with tears. After that night, an unexpected friendship began between Roger Waters and Ozzy Osbourne. Roger said in an interview, Ozzy taught me that arrogance is the greatest enemy. For years I saw myself at the top of the musical superiority pyramid, but Ozzy showed me that real music knows no hierarchy. Chuck Berry's guitar is now at the Hall of Fame, and thousands of people see it every day. They hear his story, get inspired. If I had bought that guitar, it would probably be sitting in a vault. Ozzy set it free. Ozzy, with his characteristic humility, said, Roger's a great guy. He was a bit stubborn, but who isn't? I bit the bat's head off. He was a bit arrogant. We all make mistakes. What matters is learning. Chuck Berry's Gibson ES-335 still stands at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Next to its display case is a plaque that reads, Donated by Ozzy Osbourne, because music belongs to all of us. And every day, among the visitors passing by that guitar, there are children with dreams in their eyes, just like little John Osbourne listening to Chuck Berry on the radio in Birmingham in 1963.